Okay, so the last BBC I spoke a little bit about anxiety, and I was saying how I think that relates a lot to attachment, you know, because we're attached to something we really want it to happen, or we're afraid it won't happen, or we're afraid we're going to lose something that we like or whatever. And I said not all anxiety is related to attachment. And then the question came up afterwards, well, what about a situation like PTSD where somebody feels a lot of anxiety? Okay, so I remember reading one psychologist who was saying during a very traumatic event, we're taking in a lot of sense data, so there's a lot going on in our brain, and a lot of pathways are kind of getting triggered. And then when we think about what happened to us in the past, we are greasing that neuron pathway. Okay, so that would be an explanation, you know, a scientific one according to what the brain is doing. For the Buddhist one, I think too, you would be taking in a lot of sensory input. You would be having a lot of interpretations of that, you know, that mental factor of inappropriate attention that interprets that data in a certain way. And then whenever we remember it, we are reinforcing that interpretation and the corresponding emotion that comes from it. So in that kind of situation, I think a lot of the anxiety comes because of familiarity, you know, because we are renewing the interpretation. That situation happened once, and so now we are bringing it into the future, and we see it around every corner. Yeah, and but it's interesting because in other situations, when we're safe, when things aren't happening, we don't take in as much sense data, and so we forget about that. We think that is the norm, you know. And so we ignore it and then pay attention to these very traumatic things, even though the you know, the loving situation or the care or the safety we had was actually lasted over a greater period of time. Yeah. So a lot of what we're doing in our meditation practice is coming back and really looking and saying, okay, my mind has this conclusion about one event, but in the big picture, what is the reality and what, you know, has happened more often? Yeah. So that's one element, to see what's happened more often, and to see that it's not true that things are coming at us all the time. Okay. And then also to question that inappropriate attention that says, I have no resources. You know, if something bad happens to me, I have no resources. Because actually we do have a lot of resources. We just haven't brought them to mind. You know, there's lots of things, you know, outside of us, people who will help us, things that can help us. We also have our own internal courage and our own integrity. And then also the mind that writes the thing that says, but the worst thing possible is going to happen. Yeah, and I have no resources. And to really see that actually, you know, no matter what happens, we do have resources. And really awful things happen to many people. And it's amazing how they live through these situations, you know. I remember reading some of the biographies of the Tibetans who were incarcerated during the Cultural Revolution and after the Chinese occupation of their country, and, you know, facing starvation and, I mean, horrible, horrible things they lived through. Or even when we met what was her name? The Holocaust survivor. Noemi, yeah. And like to hear her describe what she lived through, and then to see her at a restaurant in beautiful clothes with wonderful people, being quite okay, and to know that for 5 years of her life when she was young, she lived in a horrific situation and was in the process of starving to death. And to see how, in her mind, she doesn't hold on to that. Yeah? And so, if we can, she saw that, it's a new situation. She does have resources. Even when she was in the concentration camp, she had internal resources to deal with it. Even when these people were in the Chinese prisons, they had internal resources to deal with it. And so to be able to see that, we are not alone in a big, bad, ugly, dangerous world. Yeah, and to change that mental state. And I think that helps a lot to heal from the anxiety. So that we're not continuously recreating in our mind a situation that happened once. Yeah? So, yeah. And then somebody could say, well, what if it does happen again and you die? Okay, that is the worst thing that could happen. Okay? But we can see that the fear of death is also related to attachment, isn't it? We're attached to this life, we're attached to this body, we're attached to this ego identity. But sometime or another we're going to have to die. So it really helps us as much as we can to work on that attachment. And then when death comes, to say, here it is, this is my big adventure, and I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and I generate bodhicitta, and I'm going into my next life with love and compassion and the wish to practice the Dharma and become enlightened, and that's it. Let go. Yeah, nothing to hang on to here. Yeah. And so to train the mind in that now, so that at the time of death we don't freeze up and somehow think this thing is, the be-all and end-all of existence. Yeah, when, our Buddha nature is actually something much more important. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we can discuss this a little bit after lunch too.